Welcome back. In this video, we'll get a few more things set up and maybe even get the player moving and doing some scripting here. So the first thing we want to talk a little bit more about is the layers. And so like I was saying, we've got two objects here, but we can't sort of, in 2D space, layering them is a little bit different than playing with the Z-axis like we could in 3D. So what we need to do is worry about the layers. So right here, whoops, choose my object, not my sprite here. We can see that we've got the background, we've got a default layer, okay, that it's on in the sorting layers. And then the player is also on that default one as well. So, I don't know, I'm getting both clicked on here, there we go. So what I want to do is take the background. Okay, I'm having trouble with my mouse here, there we go. Just want one to get clicked there. Okay, there we go, there's your background. And in the sorting layers, what I want to do is just pull this down and I can see it's on default. Well, I want to add 3 sorting layers. So all I have to do is click on that, and the sorting layers here, click on plus, and a new layer, we're going to call this one background. Okay, so let me get rid of that. Back. Sorry. My keyboard is not being too cooperative. Okay, background. So that's the background one there. I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to call this one pickups. Pickups, and last one. And I'm just going to do it all lowercase because my keyboard's not liking me pressing the shift button. Call that one player. So I've got my 3 layers here. Now, the order is important. Background will be the furthest back. Okay, so it would be rendered first, then the pickups, then the player. So the player is the most on top. If you want to sort, change them, you can move them around like that. Okay, no problems there. So I've added my layers. Now I have to go back and click on my background. Now I'm going to set that one to background. Now you'll notice that my player has disappeared, and that's because it is in the default layer, which is actually sort of behind that one. So now I'm going to go to player, and its sorting layer has disappeared. Okay, and I'm going to go to player here. So now it's on top, and when we deal with the pickups, we'll be able to put the pickup on there. So a little bit of difference between 3D. We didn't have to really worry too much about sorting layers, although they are there. We could just use the Z-axis to sort of deal with that. In this situation, the sorting layer can really help you out and make things easier. So what we'll do next is just play around with the scale of this object a little bit, of the player. And so we're just going to make them a little bit smaller. Now there's a few ways to do it. In here, okay, there's your different things, your move, okay, your translate, your rotate, your scale. And so you can scale it either along the Y or the X-axis just by grabbing those boxes, okay, making it thinner or wider. If you want to change both of them equally, just grab the center and it will work. And so that's one way of doing it. I mean, you can also come over here, and I've showed you, you can just use the boxes. What we'll do is just put in some numbers here. 0.75. Get this to work. Of course, my keyboard is, there we go, 0.75 and 0.75. And now the Z-axis doesn't really matter. I'll just set that to 1. Oops. And I went from different ones to different ones by using the tab button there. Let's delete these other ones here. There. Now it doesn't really matter about the Z-axis, as you can see. So we just made it about the size of one of those squares there. Okay, not a big deal. Now, if you do go negative, you can flip the image. So sometimes you might want to flip your image, and that's just a quick way of doing it. In actual fact, if you want a character moving one way and then sort of turning around, in quotations there, you could just change it to a negative for its scale. All right, so we've got our player, and he's sort of scaled nicely for the board. What we want to do next is actually have the camera viewing everything. At the moment, the camera is sort of zoomed in too much. So the camera, which we haven't really talked about, is a game object. So it does have a transform and it has a name, and you could change the name if you wanted. And it does have a few sort of settings here. One of the things is when it's in 2D, it's set to orthographic. And so you might have heard me talk about orthographic when we talked about modeling, for example. You can go in your perspective view or your orthographic view, and they're both useful at different times. Obviously, for a 2D game, we're going to have an orthographic view. We do not have to have any depth. Now, the one just below it is sort of the important thing here, and it's our size. And again, we can sort of play around with it by, if I make the size smaller, it zooms in. Or if I move it out, okay, it sort of zooms out. And, it's sort of up to you what you want here. We're going to view the whole game board. So I'm going to set it about there. Okay, so mine's set to 16.7. It's often nice just to use sort of more round numbers. So I'm going to set that to 16.5. Okay, doesn't really matter, but it just makes things look a little bit better. So that's how you would change your camera, okay? So what you need to zoom in or zoom out on. Another little thing here is the background. At the moment, it's the default blue. You could put, different things in there as well, but we're just going to take a color there. One of the things is, and you should know that all pixels are made up of 3 colors, red, green, and blue, and then basically how dark or bright it is here. And you can set up these numbers. Now, we might just, if you do all of them, you can get a sort of a white, obviously, if you went them all 100%. What I'm going to do here is just give us a dark gray. So I'm going to set them all to 32. You could do a black if you want. Sometimes a dark gray is just a little bit less stark, I guess is the best word for it, so that you've got a little bit of contrast there, okay? But not completely black and white kind of thing. Right, so we sort of set up our background. Now we'll continue along here, sort of setting up our player a little bit more. We're going to have to add a few components to our player, okay, which we'll get to in a minute there. One thing is, and I haven't mentioned it yet, but you should always make sure you're saving your scene frequently so that we don't have any crashes or any problems. So let's go look at that player there, and what we want to do is add a new component to it. Now, there's a variety of ways of doing it, of course. There's here a component, and you can add stuff once you've got it selected. I prefer over here, add component. You can search, okay? You can use the search tool there. If you can't find what you want, make sure you haven't typed something in there inadvertently. I've done that before. You type that, and then, where did everything go? So make sure that you're, if you're wanting to be at the main menu, that you've got that clear. Now, there are 2 physics systems that are employed. One's for 3D, and the other is for 2D. So the default one, sort of just named physics there, indicates that it's 3D. Now, you can use both of them in a game. However, they do not interact. So a 3D physics object will not interact or collide, for example, with a 2D physics object. So it is important. And in our game here, it's all 2D, so we'll simply be focusing on the 2D one. For anything that sort of moves, you need to sort of, we need to have a rigid body on it. So I click on rigid body here, okay? And then this brings in all our stuff that we sort of mentioned before in terms of mass and things like that. We won't talk anything more, change anything more here at the moment, but just sort of know this basically allows us to, act on this object sort of through our script using, say, forces and stuff, being able to access that by accessing the rigid body component, okay? So if it doesn't have this component on it, we won't be able to basically move it around the screen. So what we're going to do also is create a script. So the script will be attached right to this. And so I'm going to add the component. And again here, there's a new script. And you can give it the name. And so I'm going to call this one player controller. And I like to use sort of the camel case there. So I've got player capitalized and controller capitalized. Okay. And we're going to do a C# script. And this year, really we're just going to be focusing on C#. I'm moving everything to C#. It just seems that all the games looking at, really use C#. There's a few complications with it over the JavaScript, but it seems to be that they teach everything now in C#. So I'm moving towards changing everything to C#. All right, so we're just going to create and add. So what it does is it brings in the player controller. One thing you'll notice here is that in the assets, it sort of created that script in the main section. So I just probably want to grab that and move it into the scripts there. Okay, so now it should be in my scripts. There it is. Okay, good. So what we can do is we can click on it and open up what's called MonoDevelop. So just double clicking on it, okay, will bring up a separate program. You cannot edit it in Unity itself. So MonoDevelop is actually an open source program that sort of comes packaged with Unity. You can use any really sort of script editor that you want. Some people enjoy using MS as Visual Studios for C#. I think the one that's sort of integrated here, this MonoDevelop, is easy enough to use. So what we'll do is we'll stop here and sort of get into the coding in the next video. No point in starting it here and then having to stop in a minute or two. So once you've got this open here, hopefully everything is going well for you. You might want to go back to your game here and just make sure you saved everything again. Okay, save that scene. When we do the scripting, when you make a change, you'll be prompted to save it as well. So you don't have to save this separately at the moment, but obviously whenever you make some coding changes, you have to save before it will even work in Unity. All right, so when we come back, we'll do some programming there. See you then.